Okay, so let's go ahead and try a lecture on business ethics. Took a little while to set this up. They changed Blackboard settings on me, or its internal functions, so I have to put some more concentration into getting the screens I want. Let's go ahead and have a look at this. This will be a little bit of a follow-up to our last lecture. We talked about how our society is structured. At the moment, it has assumed a certain, I'd call it a pathological scapegoating structure, right? We talked about the society of the spectacle and how there's a power elite who generate and control a system of images that produce certain desires and passions and beliefs in a controlled population. And we'll have a closer look at that. I know it's not a very happy topic, but it is the reality that we live in. And so it's always worthwhile to get a firmer take on that reality. And then there's an alternative to that, and that is to opt out of the scapegoating mechanism entirely in favor of effectively sacrificial love, which is the central virtue of the entire Western tradition, one way or another. That and the humble and courageous and, if you like, relentless pursuit of truth and defense of truth for the sake of truth, even at the cost of one's own life, as is exemplified in the case of Socrates, and then later in the religious mode with Jesus Christ, the two major martyrs of the entire Christian tradition. And ultimately, Jesus ended up proving even more profoundly more influential than Socrates, but we're still talking about Socrates, aren't we, right? So he's obviously an important historical figure. So let's just quickly give you a little picture of how this works. So we have a social political structure of a society based on pathological scapegoating. You have a ruling elite consisting of big finance, multinational corporations. I want to single out big tech because they're at the very center of the entire thing. Government, particularly the Department of Defense, the intelligence agencies, the State Department, but also all the alphabet agencies that basically serve as front organizations and propaganda or PR organizations for the multinationals. Think about the FDA and the CDC in relation to big pharma. I could give you a whole series of lectures on that easily, and I can tell you where to go to read. Okay, right now, just go to Peter Ghosh's book on this, G-O-T-Z-S-C-H-E, G-O-T-Z-S-C-H-E. I think it's called the pharmaceutical mafia or something like that, or the medical mafia. And he knows more about this. There's nobody in the world who knows more about it than him. Okay, so have a look at that, and you'll see how things actually work. And NGOs play a large role. This is how you present the face or virtue while actually pursuing the life of crime. Okay, and I'll send you some videos which explain how things actually work. If you watch them, the scales. If you don't already know what I'm talking about right now, the scales will drop, and you'll see it. I also encounter people from time to time who don't want to see it. So, and if I've had the strange experience of, through over a period of a few months with people, more or less showing them how things work, because I kept hitting them with content and evidence every week for like 14 weeks. And at the end of it, they were angry at me. And the reason they were angry at me is because they didn't want to see it. See what I'm saying? They saw it, they accepted it, and they felt that I had ruined their lives. So I'm not going to require that you guys watch those videos. I'm just going to send them, and you can choose what you do. Okay, so and that's not the right response, by the way. You should acknowledge reality and then courageously choose truth and goodwill, and join forces with other people around you who make that same choice, and you're going to win. You're going to win. Okay, don't worry about that, and don't get depressed because of what I'm talking about right now and explaining. All right, so this ruling elite, they engage in the planning, the production, and the full spectrum projection and installation and management of the society of the spectacle, which we talked about. And this produces distraction particularly from the raw truth, or the raw ugly truth about how they exercise power. It produces value inversion rather than having people oriented towards truth and goodness and beauty and friendship and intimacy and trust and holiness and the things that people ought to be oriented towards. They induce persons to pursue happiness through buying, as I like to say, a tube of toothpaste or a shirt, or at the upper end, a yacht or something of that sort. But none of those things can make you, I mean, these are perfectly useful things, but they can't make you happy. Not to mention status, power, and money. And what actually happens here is they're controlling people. Okay, so they direct these images towards a controlled population, and these persons end up forming a system of representations. They're virtually programmed, but these people are free, right? So they're able to respond to the programming and step outside of it if they want to. We'll get to that in a moment. But the worst case outcome is a person whose mind is completely dominated by these representations. And these representations don't allow them to look upwards towards truth, towards goodness, towards beauty, towards friendship, towards love, towards holiness, towards the transcendent. Everything's immanent and everything's material, right? Power, pleasure, money, reputation. You're so familiar with this, I don't need to explain this to you. We all know how to suck eggs here, guys. Okay, let me move on. So this generates mimetic desire, because everybody has a little bit of egoism in them, as we explained last time. As soon as somebody sees somebody else doing something, they think, the spontaneous reaction, I have a right to do that. If they see someone else acquiring something, the spontaneous thought is, now I have a right to acquire it too. Okay, so this produces, and isn't that true? Isn't that true? And how many of you have seen someone do something which you thought was impermissible, and when they did it, you thought, well, I have a right to do the impermissible thing too. The impermissible thing has become permissible. This is built into human nature because we're always trying to expand our sphere of rights unless we give up on that practice and adopt sacrificial love as our aim instead, which is always an option and has been done by millions upon millions of people. Okay, so that's because we're free, folks. We're radical. It's a mystery built into human nature. We are free. We don't have to engage in the endless struggle for expanding our rights and our power and possessions and so on. In any event, we are mimetic. Whichever of those two you adopt, okay, self-giving love or struggling with people to expand your sphere of rights, mimetic desire is operative in both cases. Okay, when persons don't choose self-giving love as the solution to conflict between human beings, they, in order to gain unity, adopt the mechanism of scapegoating, the scapegoating of the anathema. And so a group of persons who at some level or another are experiencing a kind of simmering hatred towards one another or outright violence, they can achieve unity by subtracting one person from their group and uniting against him. So the enmity doesn't go away. They simply direct the enmity against one person, as I said last time. Okay, so now I said human beings are free, right? And they're relatively smart. So some people of intelligence, goodwill, they see how this operates. By the way, Plato accused ancient Athens of the exact same thing, right? They didn't have technically the spectacle, right? They didn't have the technologically produced images, but they had rhetoric. They had a kind of a quasi craft of controlling people's opinions in the democratic assembly, and Plato was hip to that, as was his mentor, Socrates. So some people leave, okay? Some people leave. These become the truth tellers, pointing out how this works. Read Plato's Apology. If you haven't read Plato's Apology yet, take my course. I'll teach the. If you take my course, remind me. Sign up for my course and remind me to teach the Apology, because that shows you how this works in Greek antiquity and how this is eternal. This is the eternal sort of disorder of human society, which needs to be transcended through an act of freedom and love. So these truth tellers become, because they're defined against the multitude, because it's a minority of persons who actually see this, they end up becoming the convenient scapegoat. You see that? They subtract themselves, and so the multitude sort of take advantage of the opportunity, as it were, and they scapegoat the person who's already subtracted himself. He becomes the scapegoat, the anathema. But look what happens. Once you kill the scapegoat, he has the power of unifying the surrounding society, and now appears under a new light as the power whereby we have achieved social peace. He is now sacred. He's the source of all that is sacred and good. Civil peace, right? He's the sacred victim. And look how this, I talked about it last time excessively, so I won't get further into it. And then when we get into the Jewish and Christian tradition, we end up with the figure of the martyr. All right? Now, think about this. This is deep. the martyr in the act of dying gives his death as an offering. You reduce him to utter poverty, leave him with nothing. All he has left is blood and pain and anguish and even death. But from generosity of spirit, this is in the religious mode now. From generosity of spirit, he offers this up for the salvation of these people over here. That's the religious mode. Obviously, I'm talking about Jesus, but that's the tradition that we are formed in, and it behooves you to know what it is. If you don't have to be Christian, it behooves you to know what it is. Okay, so that act of giving up, saying, I have nothing left but my pain and my blood oozing from my body, and even my death, I offer that up. That has the function of calling and actually succeeding in turning a few towards truth and the voluntary adoption of suffering for the sake of others. That becomes the paradigm of if you like, leadership in the West. Okay, during the medieval period, it was basically it was just Christian leadership. You couldn't like be Muslim or Jewish or Hindu or something and adopt a leadership position. During that period of history, that's obviously changed in the modern period. Okay, so let's see. So these persons, they accuse the controllers. Now, part of the spectacle is this: the controllers then issue an absolute condemnation, an act of paradigmatic vilification. That means you're supposed to imitate that. A paradigmatic vilification of these people over here. And that becomes the condition of continued social membership. And now they confront you with a choice: belong and sacrifice the victim. You want to belong to this society? You have to satisfy the necessary condition and sacrifice the victim here. So when the topic comes up, you have to shoot down, let's say, RFK Jr. because he attacks vaccines, right? You see how that works? Bobby Kennedy Jr. was being interviewed the other day, I think, by Chris Cuomo. Cuomo said, there's this measles outbreak. And RFK came back and said, well, yeah, but in the last 20 years, 4 people have died of measles, and we have 100,000 new recorded cases of autism just last year. So why isn't the news talking about that? 100,000 versus 4, okay? And so that kind of shut down Chris Cuomo. But the idea is that, you're going to go along with the narrative, or you're going to be excluded. And that works on most people. It's working less and less, because I've interviewed a lot of people about this, particularly persons in trades, blue collar area. Why? I think I may have mentioned this before, but my theory is that if you work in a trade, if you drive a truck, if you're working in a warehouse, you're in constant grinding contact with reality. Because if you make a mistake, you can cut off a finger or kill somebody or kill a whole family in your truck or whatever it may be. So those folks are in continuous contact with reality. They don't have the luxury, really. They don't have the luxury of entertaining all sorts of crazy philosophical theories. They know what reality is because they're right there in contact with it. They're sustaining injuries, so on and so forth, okay? So they know. So they were in a better position to see this mechanism here because it's just, once you see it, and you can't deny it, and that's the end of it. All right, so anyway, nonetheless, particularly with the persons who are not really in contact with reality, no offense if you're in a white-collar position, this tends to work better on people in the white-collar sectors because they're a little bit in abstraction from material reality, okay? And they also have a sense of specialness. I'm not criticizing anybody here. They have a sense of specialness, and that specialness consists significantly in agreeing with whatever the New York Times has to say. So I'm going to get myself in serious trouble with you folks. Okay, so I'm saying this with gentleness and with love. I'm not trying to insult anybody, and you can push back and send me an email and say, I think you're wrong, Dr. Schiff here. I'll always listen to your argument and respect what you have to say. Okay, so, but it does work on a large number of people. Usually, 99% of the people out there, it's been breaking down. And they go along with the message. You have to sacrifice these people over here. Oh, he's an anti-vaxxer, or he's a Trump supporter, a J6er, or a transgender, psychotic activist, or some libtard Democrat. You ever heard that one? Whatever it may be, or some snowflake, right? So it goes both directions, guys, and from other directions also. Oh, he's Muslim, he's homosexual, right? Oh, it's a Zionist, right? So on and so forth. Now, there are legitimate criticisms you can direct against any individual person, and legitimate criticisms you can direct against any group of people. That's just a fact about life, okay? What I'm talking about, and there are things you can praise about each. And what I'm talking about here is the mechanism whereby a group of people take another person or another group of people and scapegoat them and thereby acquire a sense of solidarity and unity. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's how that works, guys. All right. So, and I gave you two figures here. Obviously, Socrates and Jesus. We talked about that. All right, excellent. So now let's move on. I wanted you to have that. You can take a screenshot of that and make it a possession for the rest of your life. I hope it helps you. Pardon me while I suck down some coffee. Try to do this right. So now, hopefully you can see this here. It says, now, unfortunately, because of some technological glitch, we lost my second lecture on Aristotle, but thanks to Professor Sisson, who draws significantly from Aristotle, also Alistair McIntyre, and also from Catholic social teaching, which is basically natural law teaching. So it doesn't depend upon the New Testament. It depends upon a kind of it does depend upon a theistic supernaturalism, but that could be Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, so on and so forth. And then it works out a kind of ethic on that basis. All right, so it's approximately universal. It might not work for persons who are staunch atheistic naturalists who believe in social Darwinism and that the strong ought to dominate the weak. If that's your position, which is the Nazi position and the position of the Rockefeller and Carnegie families, if that sounds scandalous to you, look at the book, The War Against the Weak, where it talks about them. And also it's the position effectively, that wasn't her central position, but it was a position of Margaret Sanger, the old Planned Parenthood lady. But she adhered to that when you can kind of dig around. But she was more about preventing people from having kids. That was her big thing. All right. She was also a racist. She talked about all that, what was her phrase? So all the teeming, useless life down in South America and Africa. Oh, wonderful lady. Okay, so and this is the big hero of a lot of people. I'm going to steer clear of her, thank you. All right, so Aristotle, arete, ergon, fusis, telos, and eudaima. So arete refers to virtue, and we can also translate that with excellence, right? Ergon, that refers to your function, your work, what you do. So thinking is something that you do. Sensing is something that you do. Even eating and maintaining yourself is something that you do. Fusis is just a word we use for nature, as in human nature, okay? And telos is your aim or end or goal in life. And eudaimonia, that's happiness or flourishing, the big goal that you have. So let's now ask this big question. How do virtue, function, human nature, and happiness actually relate to one another? Okay. So I think I explained these. We can move on. Memorizing definitions is one thing. Let's try to understand how these actually relate. That was the question. So the human being is by nature a political animal. So there are two aspects of this, guys. We're gregarious, right? We like to congregate and live in common, not just merely kind of get together on a field and kind of stare up at space, kind of stare around like cows. We actually get together, we cooperate with one another, we build things, we get married and have kids, we form societies, right? We pass laws and we enforce those laws. We conduct religious rituals. Nowadays, we organize artistic and musical festivals and all sorts of wonderful stuff, right? Okay, the second thing we are is communicative. We are gregarious and communicative, those two things. And that means that we need the virtues, because if we're going to get on, we need moral excellence to get on with one another and to flourish and to excel at being human and to excel as a group, as a community. Okay, so I think that's enough for us. So happiness requires living well, right? You can't be happy if you're in a coma or you fall asleep and for some reason you stay asleep, which would be a coma, right? Living well, that's not actually, it's not medically or scientifically the same condition. Okay, anyway. So living well is the same as acting well. That is in a manner that enacts the virtues. So here's what you need to know. Virtuous acts are proper parts of a happy, flourishing life, and that's going to be true in the conduct of business, all right? So relationships require the practice of the virtues. Now let's talk about this. So what you should do is hit pause and answer these questions, okay? You can do it right to, I'm giving you an extra credit assignment in the discussion board where you can answer these questions. You want to hit pause and just start answering these questions right in the discussion board, and then if you missed a DB in the past, you can make up that DB with a new one, okay? Or I'll just give an extra point. Even if you did all of them, you get an extra point, extra dB in there, okay? Follow me? Whatever a dB is worth, it's worth whatever, like 0.3 points. You get that towards your final grade, plus these are worthwhile questions. You do that, and then come back. All right, welcome back. So now let's talk about the voluntary and the involuntary. So what's the difference between voluntary and involuntary? Well, it's easier to define the involuntary first, okay? An action is involuntary if either it was coerced, right? Someone coerces you to do something. That wasn't your voluntary action. That was you being forced, right? Okay. And hold on a second. I'm missing my coffee. Here we go. And then if you do it in ignorance, like you're wrestling somebody, you're not aware the person is suffering from a bone disease, and you break his leg. Okay. You didn't know he had a bone disease. Apparently he didn't know either. Otherwise he wouldn't have wrestled you, or he's very irresponsible. So you're not responsible for having broken his leg in having done what people normally do in wrestling. Okay. So ignorance and coercion get you off the hook, as it were. All right. So we have that. Hence, an action is voluntary if it has its source in the agent, like if you're the cause of it. All right. Now, some people are worried about, you were shaped by your surrounding society, or your nervous system is firing all these electrochemical impulses through your body, right? And you have a particular history, and then your genes, your DNA play some kind of role. We don't know what it is, but it plays some kind of role. And so, genes and nervous system and society and all that determines you to the point where you're no longer free. No one's ever proved that's the case. No one has ever proven that's the case. Okay, I can prove this quite easily. Do you have the power to get up right now and go take a drink of water out of the toilet bowl? Do you have that power? Now, I know you're not going to do it, but I'm asking you a question. Do you have the power to do it? Are you free to do that? You know you're free to do that. Okay, so you're convinced that you're free. So why deny it? See, that's a trick, Dr. Schick. You're tricking me. No, I'm not. I'm appealing to your immediate self-evident awareness of the fact that you're free. Because whenever you reflect on it, every time you reflect on it, you come to the conclusion that you're free. So therefore, if to deny that you're free is to get yourself involved in a contradiction. Because every time you reflect on it, and every time you're put in a circumstance, that is basically whenever you're awake, where you have to make choices, you make the assumption that you're free. That's built into human self-consciousness. Do you follow me? So maybe we can say that a human being is free is not true by definition, okay? But nonetheless, it is necessarily true. That's what we call a synthetic a priori proposition. Take my logic course, we'll talk about that. It's synthetic because you can deny it without without producing a self-contradictory statement. Okay, you follow that? It's not, if you deny it, say human beings are not free, that's not self-contradictory, it's not internally contradictory. But it will end up standing in an external, not internal, but an external contradiction to another judgment you inevitably form, namely that you are free, sooner or later. Okay, so it's synthetic because if you deny it, the statement, the human being is free. If you deny that, you don't produce an internal contradiction. But nonetheless, we all know that it's true. And we know it spontaneously, as it were. So we can say that that's a priori. It's an assumption we bring to experience. We have to make that assumption in order even to act as an agent. You follow me? Okay, hope that makes some sense. If you didn't follow that, rewind, listen to that as many times as is necessary for you to get that. All right, so I'll give you another synthetic a priori proposition. There are real things out there in the world. You make that assumption all the time. You can't act unless you make that assumption. So this idea that all your experiences are being produced by some hidden part of your mind somewhere, and nothing exists but these sensations that you're generating. I mean, you can entertain that idea, and people have entertained that idea. It's called solipsism. But as soon as you step out of the philosophy course room, where you take off your philosopher's hat, you go right back you snap instantly back to the universal assumption. There are real things out there with which you interact. Okay, so an action is voluntary if it has a source in the agent, duty or freedom. It is not coerced, okay? And it is not done in ignorance. All right, hopefully this is making some sense to you. So there are three elements of a good voluntary action. The object of the action, the type of action performed. What's the object? For example, truth-telling versus lying. Okay, this is the type of action you're doing. You're either telling them the truth or let's put it this way, you're either attempting to tell the truth, or you're deliberately telling an untruth, okay? Now, there are these middle things where you kind of sand down the corners and give a kind of approximation to the truth because there isn't time to get into the whole story. You know, in that case, you're intending to tell the truth, or at least that part of it, which is good enough for the moment. All right, so there's respecting property versus the opposite of that, theft, or perhaps vandalism too. I put that in there. There's what you're doing, respecting the right to life. You know, one might get good and angry at a coworker or something like that and say, you know, I'm just going to go cool off. Every once in a while, somebody makes the wrong choice, guys, and kills one of his coworkers. Okay? Some people even plan it out. I can't even imagine. I mean, how angry could I possibly get at someone that I'm going to work, you know, make a plan, make a plan the whole thing out, work it out over 2 weeks, and you know, and do it step by step. I don't know what would have to be true of me in order for me to do that. It's just not going to happen. Okay, so maybe the person had a tough upbringing or something. I don't know. Then there's respect for dignity and autonomy versus, let's say, one opposition to that would be torture, right? You know, murder would be, opposed to that as well. Rape is opposed to that. These horrible things that we don't want to exist, but they do exist. All right. So lying, theft, murder, or torture are objects that, due to being intrinsically evil, are always forbidden. There's no way of doing these things virtuously. Okay? So that's the object, and you want to be on this side here: truth telling, respecting property, the right to life and dignity. Then we have the intention. The intention is that for the sake of which one performs the type of action one is performing. This is reminding us of Hegel, but Hegel gets this stuff from Aristotle. One may give to charity in a visible way in order to make a good impression on the attractive girl from the conservative Catholic family. I prepared these slides for the people at Providence College, right? Or one may do so from genuine compassion for the poor and to glorify God. Okay, so bear with my Providence College slides here. Circumstances can make a good action bad, but cannot make a bad action good. All right, hear that? Circumstances can make a good action bad, but you can't make a bad action good. You can't take this bad stuff here and make it good. There is no circumstance that makes that good. Unlike for utilitarianism. For utilitarianism, and now it's extreme kind of lunatic extension in long-termism. Long-termism is utilitarianism plus transhumanism. So they maintain more or less we can expend with, torture, manipulate, violate everybody alive right now, provided that's necessary and sufficient to get us to a point where we have a transhuman species that will enjoy extremely high levels of happiness, let's say for billions of years, right? So you and I can be tortured to death for the sake of these transhuman non-humans, really, because they won't be human any longer, provided they achieve a very high level of happiness and they keep that going long enough. Okay, these are the reflections of psychotics. Okay, maybe that sounds unfair, or like I'm hitting below the belt or something of that sort. But well, I'm going to stand by what I just said, because if these persons get what they want, there's going to be a lot of pain and grief, and they're going to look on that with indifference and even approval. If that's not the attitude, if those are not the actions and the attitudes of psychopaths, I don't know what is. Okay, so I'm just going to stand by that. So here we go here. All right, so there's no way of making murder good. We have that. So there are levels of freedom also. Physical freedom is the power to use one's body to perform a range of actions. Okay, that's your physical freedom. So, if one suffers from a disease and one suffers a withered arm, right? Well, you can't use your arm any longer. I don't know if we have withered arms any longer, but in antiquity, right, there were withered arms. And there were stories in the New Testament where Christ healed a withered arm. So it's like a lot. Oh, also, they have that show, right? The Chosen. There was a scene there where I've never seen one of those episodes all the way through, but I saw a little scene where Jesus healed some fellow's withered hand. Okay. And there's, besides physical freedom, at a higher level, there's psychological freedom. This is the power to employ one's will to choose to do or not to do X. That's always what it comes down to, right? This parallels our distinction between affirming a proposition or denying it, right? You can say God exists, or you can say it's false that God exists. You can do something. You can give money away to, say, a charitable hospital like St. Jude's, or you can not give that money away. It's one of the two. You can't do both. Okay. All right. You can give different degrees, different amounts of money. That too, right? Of course. But you can either give $5 or not give $5. Maybe you gave 10, right? Because 10 is not the same thing as 5. 5 times 2. All right. So it does not involve being indifferent between doing X and not doing X. That's important to recognize here. Your psychological freedom is not indifference. You might be strongly inclined to do X. You might be strongly inclined not to do X. Okay? But notice this. Even if you have a strong inclination, with an effort of the will, you can do the opposite. You follow me? That's called self-control. Sometimes persons have a very strong inclination to strike someone who just made them very angry. And you might even say in some circumstances, one is warranted in being very angry because the person was really out of line, okay? But we all know that striking the individual, unless it's something really, really extreme, unless the person, it's more or less attacking you or to attack someone else, whatever it may be, that striking the person is not justified. So an individual might have a very strong inclination to strike somebody else, and nonetheless act against it. So we're all familiar with that. Then there's a further level, guys. It's moral freedom. Moral freedom is the ability to conceive of morally good actions and to choose them. It requires having received a moral formation. Okay, so there was a famous group, a tribe in, let me think about this for a moment, Melanesia. Their name isn't coming to me right now, but, oh wait, we studied them together. Yeah, we studied them together. So that was in the Ruth Benedict article. And then there was another group in Africa called appropriately the IK. So these two groups have more or less the same morals. They promote mistrust and striking hard, striking first, and things of that sort. Well, these persons don't have moral freedom because due to the circumstances of their society, something about their geography and the geological features of the habitat they inhabit, the climate, right? Maybe some peculiar foreign relations, the history of that particular group. They were struck down low, and just to get by, they had to default, right, to a kind of very low moral standard. And that perpetuated itself over a generation or two, and now they've forgotten how to be good in the meantime. Maybe things got, maybe the surrounding circumstances have gotten better in the meantime, but they've forgotten how to be good. So they've lost moral freedom. So, all right. So right habituation. So if you're religious, you can actually pray for those people, believe it or not. So first, habit building. So we're talking about habit building here, guys. First, habit building action should be done in accordance with right reason. Okay. We need to have wise people, wise adults, serious people who are still possessed of, good humor, and have a sense of mirth and playfulness, but are serious about life. Those two things. You want to be both, not just great, not like these Roman generals who never laughed at all. They went too far in the area of the grave, and not like these bon vivants who spend all of their time, carousing and having a good time and producing one witticism after another. Well, they're not serious enough because they're not attuned to the suffering in human existence and what's serious about human existence and what we're called to be. We're called to be morally great is what we're called to be. And the other folks are they're a little bit too serious. They don't understand that there is, a certain kind of joy that can come to efflorescence within the human being, provided we are attentive to simply the small ways in which beauty appears in everyday experience. Here, but hit pause, just walk outside, look at the blue sky and some clouds, and experience the joy of nature, right? Very simple. It's a profound, profound gift. Okay, you yourself, this one cell in your body is this absolute symphony, a symphony of complexity and intricacy and life. And any random cell, and all of them, now you have billions of these cells all working in concert to produce you. You're a miracle, man or lady. Okay, so be happy. Okay, so a child being trained in virtue must be told the right reason so that he or she can act in accordance with it. All right. So you need wise persons who are serious. I would say I'm going to add playful, who are forming these children and telling them how to act. For example, saying, well, you have to take life seriously and you have to answer the call to moral greatness. And in this particular circumstance, you have to give your brother his toy back, right? And children have no difficulty being playful, so you don't have to counsel them on that yet. But teenagers might have lost it at some point if they start brooding. That happens. So second, the action should steer away from both excess and deficiency. This is an old idea. Let's do it again. Well, we lost that lecture, right? It should steer away from excess and deficiency. You shouldn't allow your anger to go too far, but neither should you not react with indignation at certain provocations. Somebody that you know just says, well, your father's pretty much worthless, isn't he? And you have to respond to that and say, how dare you speak about my father that way? You owe me an apology and him, right? Now, if you immediately strike the guy, maybe you're going too far. So, and some of you are saying, no, that's striking him as just. I'm not going to get into a conversation. I'm not going to get into. I'm not going to produce a recorded statement justifying striking anyone. So I'm going to move on from that. This, at least, is Aristotle's strict advice, and Aquinas tends to follow him, but not always. So we study both Aristotle and Aquinas. So you can think about both of them in this connection. For Aristotle, acting on too great a degree of audacity and utterly without fear is a path towards developing the habit of rashness. Okay, not courage. Curiously, Aquinas disagrees with him here. Aquinas says it would seem that one should fear nothing. There's nothing in this life you should fear from Aquinas' point of view. That's basically the Catholic point of view. Okay, and ultimately, the Protestant pastors I've listened to basically agree with this. There's nothing in this life that you should fear. You fear one thing: he who can destroy both body and soul, right? And that's even in a psalm. I think it's Psalm 34. It might be 33 in the Catholic Bible. Sometimes I get these numbers mixed up. I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. All my fears of natural things. And then later it says, gather around me, ye children, I will teach thee the fear of the Lord instead. That's whom you should fear. Not in an abject, craven fear, but in a mode of awe, right before the infinite being, the source of all life and goodness. Right. Third, one will acquire a good habit if one comes to take pleasure in good actions. Okay, if you come to take pleasure, like if you take pleasure in people doing good things, and one will acquire a good habit if one comes to be pained before the spectacle or imagining of bad actions. So some persons, they take pleasure in the thought of a bad action. Okay. Now, nowadays we don't see it thanks to the sexual revolution, but fornication puts a woman at risk of entering into a very difficult situation for her. I mean, if she has life inside of her, and there's the man who cooperated with her to produce that life is not backing her up. He didn't make her a prior promise and say, "Oh yeah, by the way, if, after we do this, nature takes its course. I'm gonna, I'll stick around with you for at least 18 years, raising the kid." That puts her in a very desperate situation. So that's led to at least 50 million abortions in our country. And I know women who experience great psychological pain on account of that. I can think of at least two. I'm probably overlooking some others. And it also leads to infanticide. It leads to neglected children who end up not being socialized. I used to work down at the prison at Cranston. I want to go back. And a lot of my students down there, same story. Raised by one parent, working 10, 12 hours a day, but pay all the bills, basically not given any moral formation whatsoever, who grew up on the street and decided to be Jesse James and ended up, or to sell drugs, and ended up down in Cranston, right? They were neglected and not formed. Is that their fault? They didn't make their childhood, okay? So it's partially, significantly not their fault, and partially it was their fault, because we're all taught growing up, what it is to be a good person. There are indefinite number of representations of this on TV and in film. Though typically what you have in a TV show and a film nowadays, it's been true for a long time, is that nobody is really good in any of these things. Right? They're all fornicating from this sort of classical kind of this conservative morality that was in place until about 1950 or so. There's one person who's less bad than all the other ones, and that's your hero in a contemporary movie or show. So if I sound like your great grandfather or something like that, I'll take that as a compliment. All right, so character. So character is the result of the interaction of an agent's moral habits with one another within his or her total person. Right? These are all observations I take from CSUN, even if you didn't talk about them in the lecture that or the interview you listened to. So what's your character? All of these moral habits inside of you interact with one another. Okay, so your character is greater than the sum of its parts. The way that these features of your character, maybe you're somewhat audacious. Okay, maybe you're also given to sorrow. So now you're a little bit too far towards the audacious, and you're a little bit too far towards the sorrowful. Go back to a good idea for you guys would be to go back and listen to the lecture on Aquinas on the emotions again, right? Okay, maybe you have a little bit too much of a desire for chocolate bars, whatever it may be. Okay, but all these things interact with one another. But maybe you're actually quite generous. All right, you guys follow? And very hopeful. All these things interact. Now we have this distinctive person that we're looking at here. So the second thing to know is that character displays a greater permanence than habits and is more difficult to change. Well, that's obvious because you change one habit at a time. But your character is all those habits. You want to make a significant change in your character as a whole. You have to work on one habit at a time and change those. I'll tell you how to do that. I'll give you some. I think I've mentioned this. I'll say it again. I'll give you some exercises right now. First exercise: take 3 days. And don't use any foul language, no sacrilegious language, no ugly language, okay? 3 days. And you want to make that real. Every time you produce an F-bomb or something of that sort, or even the D word, you give $1 to charity, all right? So St. Jude's is a hospital that gives free care to kids. You can give your $1 to them. Or you can give it to wherever, Emmanuel House, some place where they feed people for nothing. All right, you can do something like that. And second would be take 3 days and don't complain. Let's work up to that one. So we started out with not swearing. The next one would be not to gossip. That's a tough one for people. Take 3 days, don't gossip. All right, you want to make it real, pay $1 every single time you gossip to something or other. And then the third level is not complaining. That was very difficult for people, but it'll make you conscious of how often you complain. 1, 2, 3. And then the fourth stage is to be a more forgiving person. And one way of doing that, it might seem artificial at first, but think of somebody, who you don't really have a positive relationship with, but do something positive for that person, do something generous towards that person, whoever it may be. Okay, so those are 3 things. And the next thing is to begin to take people seriously. Okay, and look at people. How to put this? I'll have to think about how to formulate that. A whole exercise for it. Let me come back to that one. So third, character provides a more accurate and complete picture of a person than mere habits, which are limited to single traits. Well, that's self-evident. Character enables prediction of actions and reactions. Fourth, character integrates habits at various stages of perfection or imperfection, right, by definition. And fifth, one habit may amplify or diminish another habit, very interestingly. This is true in particular of prudence, which affects all the virtues. If you have fortitude, your fortitude isn't going to be it's not really going to be worth anything unless you have prudence, right? You have to be able to map out a path from where you're standing right now towards achieving your goal. And then you have to go ahead and do it. All right, so, by the way, if you're going to be prudent, you need fortitude. If you have that plan, you're not going to carry it out unless you have fortitude. And fortitude, that's your ability to confront a whole series of obstacles and even pains and work right through it, play the long game, keep a cool head, act with goodwill, and get to the goal. There's a woman named, I'll send the video, Catherine Austin Fitz, who's a finance guru. She seems to know everything. And she has this idea of turtling forward. Just keep moving forward like a turtle. Don't let anything stop you. If ever you let things overwhelm you, as I understand, life can be difficult. I sympathize. I totally sympathize. But you don't want to feel permanently overwhelmed and just kind of lay there. You keep turtling forward. That's fortitude. All right, so the mean between the extremes. So there are 2 rules to be observed for acquiring a moral habit at the mean. First, one should strive more to steer away from the extreme, which is more opposed to the virtue being sought, right? So, for example, you're trying to become courageous. Fleeing from danger is more opposed to courage than is rushing headlong into it. Right, the code of the samurai, the way of the samurai is the headlong rush. So the samurai, they actually cultivated an ethic of audacity. They would just run right in there, get it done, and if you die, you die. It's an honorable death. That's their way of looking at it. Okay, it's interesting. All these stringent moral codes, they're virtually defined by contempt of death, right? So in the West, obviously, we have the Christian moral code, which is virtually a call to martyrdom. Better to die a martyr or die in any capacity than to commit one heinous sin. They call it a mortal sin, the sin that kills the soul. Okay, there's something deep there, whether you're a believer or not. There are certain things, if you do them, they kill your soul. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? They kill your soul. I mean, you're still alive, kind of moving around, but something dies inside of a person when they do certain sorts of things. Like these corporate raiders who just buy a company and then chop it into bits and, leave thousands of people unemployed, or these individuals who have destroyed entire neighborhoods through their crazy, like back in 2008 when the whole bubble burst with their crazy mortgage schemes. All right, so second, avoid the extreme that is easier to drift towards. For example, it is easier to drift towards eating for pleasure than it is to resist the temptation to eat too much, right? So eating for pleasure is much easier to drift towards that than to resist the temptation to eat too much. So better to err on the side of eating a little bit less. Now, I understand some of you work tough jobs. You work this out relative to your own situation. And then we can call these lifestyles, it's not exactly the best way of putting it. There's the pursuit of money. Well, money is a mere means, okay? So that can't be the aim of life. Yet some people treat it as if it were the aim. Like these billionaires. There's a guy named Ray Dalio, who's a famous investment banker. He's a billionaire. He says he's reasonably happy. And then I think Tucker Carlson asked him. And some people think Tucker Carlson is anathema. Just go with this. Tucker Carlson asked him, how many how many happy billionaires do you know? Because Dalio knows dozens of billionaires, probably hundreds. He says, well, maybe a couple. Most of these people are unhappy. That's why they pursue money forever, because they're trying to fill a hole and they're not succeeding. It's not working. Second, there's a life devoted to pleasure. By that he means physical pleasure. Well, that's something that's transient. Okay? That's something that's transient. That it happens and then disappears, and that's not going to make a person happy either. What it does is fosters in a person a habit of intense desire to experience the pleasure again. That's a path to addiction, and that leads eventually to, in some cases, sex addiction. They even stop enjoying the sexual act, right? Because they engage in it too often, and so on and so forth. Various sorts of drugs. People become addicts because they're seeking that first high. They lose it. Okay, and this is a scourge in our society. Various sorts of addiction. Okay. Third, there are people who devote themselves to status and honor. They think of, most people out there hold them in the highest possible regard. They've won, right? They won the contest of life for having the highest reputation, like a rock star or celebrity or something of that sort. Well, a lot of these people are miserable. They're just miserable, and eventually, you see that periodically they have a breakdown. Some of these cases, I think these people are actually victims. They didn't do it to themselves. Like with Britney Spears, you hear what she said. She said she was abused as a kid, and she got in the entertainment industry. There were basically some evil people who got their hooks into her and destroyed her life. So I'm not going to blame her. And we're thinking that's probably what happened to the guy who's having a breakdown right now. He followed the same path. Justin Bieber, unfortunately. And so I'm trying to think of a case where somebody, pursued that, and it should be easy to think, of cases where persons just put all their eggs in the basket of having people like them, popularity, and that does not produce genuine human happiness, genuine flourishing. I think it's self-evident, but I can't think of a concrete example where someone admitted it. Okay, so that's why I was hesitating. So fourth, there was the life devoted to study. That's Dr. Shikyar's life and Aristotle's life. He says that's the best possible life. Well, I'm thrilled he thinks that's the best possible life. I'm not actually in agreement with that entirely, but I see what he's saying. Okay, see what he's saying. It's good. It's pretty good. I also think hard work is quite valuable and dignified. I myself like working in the open air. and hard work 12 hours a day with little breaks built in there. For me, that was pretty good. But Aristotle didn't have much respect for that, but Aristotle was a Greek. Aristotle was Greek. Our tradition is not the tradition of the ancient Greeks. We adopted ideas from the ancient Greeks, right? And kind of stitched those together with Roman ideas and with Christian ideas, and also with the ideas of the barbarians. No offense, if you're a barbarian. I'm half barbarian myself. So the Germans and whatnot. So it's a complex tradition. So fifth, the life of virtue involves stable moral habits that are enacted in virtuous actions, which are choice-worthy for their own sakes, right? You're generous for the sake of the generous action, right? The action itself is something good, but that generous action is a proper part of your happiness. You live out and live through your happiness and being generous and being just and acting with fortitude. We can add the mild virtues of being kind and humble and patient, and generosity belongs to that list too, right? Being generous. Okay. So, for time here. So practical wisdom is needed because while it is necessary to have good intentions, it's not enough, right? I already explained that. All right. And how can you acquire practical wisdom if you don't already possess it? I mean, how in the world are you going to get to it? Well, you need two things. First, a role model. A role model instructing you on how to act within a given situation. Think about it this way, friend. Come here, kid. Let me explain to you how life works. Okay? Think about this way. This is what that other person is thinking. This is what that other person desires from you. If you act this way, this is going to be the result. If you act that way, that's going to be the result. Okay? Right? So you need a role model. Donald Trump, when he was a young man back in the 70s, had a role model. I forgot his name. Hold on, let me think about it. Roy Cohen was his role model. Okay? So second, we learn from our mistakes. So you need a good counselor, and you're just going to have to get out there and make some mistakes and reflect on those mistakes and avoid them in the future. Hopefully they won't completely crush you. Make a really, really bad one, if everything breaks down here, you can always pick up and move to Arizona or start over. So by reflection on what one did wrong, one may make an adjustment towards what is right. Okay, so that's pretty clear. All right, so that's how you're going to acquire practical wisdom, but you'll need fortitude in order to carry out your plans. So here are the ingredients of a virtuous action. First, it must be done with attention to what one is doing, why one is doing it, and the surrounding circumstances. Second, it has to be done from a deliberated decision. Third, both attention and decision must rest upon a firm habit of character. By analogy, a monkey typing wildly at a keyboard may produce a grammatical sentence, but he would not have done so grammatically. Make any sense? It would have been a random act, almost like a meteor hitting a field, and you look at it, and suddenly there's some Hebrew characters on it. There was a guy named Wendell Jones who did some research out in what today we call Israel, and he found that there were Hebrew characters inscribed in the mountain range surrounding Jerusalem. Vendyl Jones. You just look that up and type Hebrew characters and hit the image function in Google, and it should generate that for you. I think it said we are all blessed on account of what Ephraim did here, right? I think Ephraim was a son of Judah, right? Yeah. I have a sieve-like memory. Let's see here. So, likewise, a small child or an immoral adult may by chance perform a just action, right? But neither would have done so justly. To act justly, you have to have a firm habit. That's the Aristotelian perspective, right? Okay. And within the later tradition, right, which becomes the Christian tradition, you can receive a grace from on high, which can lift you above yourself. And if you cooperate with the grace, you get credit. You get credit for having performed a just action, even though you to date have had bad character. All right. You keep doing that, and your character is reformed. So virtue involves a functional integration of reason and the passions. Okay, this is most easily seen if one considers three types of person. So there are weak-willed persons. So furnish yourself an example of a weak-willed person. This is the person who desires what is wrong, but he knows what's right. Oh, but he succumbs to the bad desire. That happens often enough. But then there's the self-controlled or strong-willed person. This person desires what is wrong, but he knows what is right, and he overcomes the bad desire. He strikes it down for the sake of what is right. And then there's genuine moderation. Okay? This person desires what is right. He knows what is right and chooses what is right. He's completely integrated, right? This is why we get this notion of functional integration. His faculties do not clash with one another, but they work together seamlessly. Okay, so a lot of people are divided against themselves. This is sort of the human condition. We're divided against ourselves. But it is possible to achieve quite a height of virtue. In that case, your intellect and your passions will be working seamlessly together. And you can work on that, achieve that. So, the unity of the virtues. Not only are reason and passions functionally integrated for Aristotle, but the virtues themselves, practical wisdom, justice, fortitude, and moderation, as the classical virtues. Later we call these the cardinal virtues. These form a unity. One can glean the truth of the matter when one considers the person who is kind, so long as he or she is relatively comfortable, but becomes sharp and unpleasant with the arrival of sufficient inconvenience. So, guys, kindness and generosity require the harder virtues of self-denial and fortitude in order to exist at all. Okay, it's easy to be kind when it's easy, when things are going well for you. You might even call that just being nice. There's a difference between being nice and being kind. All right? You can be nice to someone you don't like. Can you be kind to someone you don't like? I think your answer might be, well, no, or it'd be really hard. Well, if you possess the virtue of kindness, right, you can be kind even to persons you don't like because you put your likings. You say, well, what I like, what I don't like, who cares? It doesn't really make any difference. Let me go ahead and make things better for this person and for my community by treating this person with a certain gentleness and generosity. Okay. All right. So that's that moral heroism I keep pointing out that we're called to. It's discussed in the entire Western literary tradition, exemplified obviously in the religious tradition, right? Obviously in the New Testament, paradigmatically, right? But then in all of the religious commentary on Scripture and theological treatises amounting to millions and millions of pages, the vast tradition. They've done an excellent job the past 100 years burying most of that, so that there's a small minority of persons still dedicated to it, and other persons don't even have any comprehension. They don't even know it exists, right? And when they encounter it, they find a lot of its content totally incomprehensible because it's basically the contradictory of what they've been taught. So a person is raised so as not to be able to appreciate that material. You can't blame them because that's they inherited a certain society. That's just the situation. That's where we are. So it works in the other direction. There's no shortage of historical anecdotes concerning persons who were stern with themselves. They were stern with themselves, but also callous and even cruel towards others. Okay, we get those kinds of examples in history and in literature as well. So I'm trying to think of Dickens is good at producing people like that. Charles Dickens in his novels. How about Ahab, Captain Ahab in Moby Dick? He's absolutely stern with himself, but he was a tyrant man. He was driving his crew towards extinction and hunting down this white whale. The white whale represents the mystery of being and ultimately divine providence. And Ahab didn't like the fact he had to have his leg bitten off by a whale. And so he decided to shake his fist at God and basically swear vengeance against him. God's represented in the white whale. And so he goes off on this hopeless endeavor to take vengeance against being itself, right? And so, but to do that, you have to be pretty stern. Okay, but he had that, at least that much going for him. Ahab, he was stern with himself, but also extremely callous towards everyone else. And obviously, the whole mission ends in, by definition, right, has to end in destruction and catastrophe. So when self-discipline is present as a genuine virtue, it cannot produce vicious effects as a genuine virtue, because then it's combined with kindness and generosity. Okay, so maybe I didn't get this out. If you're genuinely kind, guys, then you're able to be kind even in difficult circumstances, right? Maybe you're a little hungry. Maybe you haven't paid your mortgage for a month or something. Like you're 2 payments behind. You have a little bit of stress. You're saying, Dr. Shuki, you're requiring too much of me. I probably am at the moment. I'm trying to give you extreme examples. Another difficult situation is you have to interact with somebody you just really don't like. You can be kind anyway. Yes, Rob? All right. So let's see here. Self-discipline depends upon the coexistence of kindness, and I think we set it up about this. Let's move on. So unity of the virtues too. So we ended up going over this Aristotle. I think this is actually good. I'm glad we went over this Aristotelian stuff, even though we haven't gotten really deep into what Cison is doing. He integrates McIntyre and the Catholic social teaching in there. So, having his video and then my presentation here is probably overall beneficial. And I guess it wouldn't help you too much to have me just repeat what he said, right? So further, no moral virtue can reliably achieve a good effect without practical wisdom, ordering the path or means to the end set in accordance with a virtue. If you need practical wisdom to create the path from where you're sitting at the moment to the morally good aim you want to achieve. Okay, so let's skip that. So notice this, practical wisdom presupposes a conception of the human good as a whole. So that's what the merely clever person is missing. So there are plenty of persons out there who are clever. They can get some things done. They can even, build up a multi-million-dollar business. But if you're working for a merely clever person, you're going to be relatively unhappy because it's not a good person. It's merely clever. He knows how to squeeze money out of his employees. And at least you won't be happy in virtue of working for this person. It'll be despite working for this person because maybe the other coworkers are good and so on and so forth. But the person who has genuine practical wisdom has a vision of the human good. This is an individual who understands that justice is good, fortitude and moderation, and obviously practical wisdom, but also humility and patience and generosity and kindness. These are good things. And he wants to foster these virtues in his workers as best he can, right? So if I owned a company, I'd have people doing little virtue seminars once a month or something like that, not to be too heavy-handed about it, and then give people little virtue building exercises. But when you do the virtue building exercises, everyone's appreciative of it. I know that from course journals I get from people. All right, and then if you're dealing with just a person of but mere cleverness, that's compatible with outright viciousness. I mean, he's just there for the money, so that makes him vicious, actually. And I had one person I was working for, I haven't met him personally, but just the way he organized his business. I mean, if you wanted health insurance there, you had to pay like 25% of your monthly income just to get that darn insurance, right? I mean, he treated you like garbage, effectively. And he didn't pay as much as you were worth, and that was certain. So, all right, so now we can get to Catholic social teaching. Let's see, maybe. Catholic social teaching consists of 6 core principles. Human dignity. I think we normally all agree on that human beings possess dignity. Now, if you're a eugenicist or a transhumanist, you're going to disagree. If you're a long-termist, you're going to profoundly disagree and say that we don't possess dignity and we need to be overcome. Well, that was the position of the Nazis, guys. It's the same thing. The Nazis thought we had to be overcome, and some races need to be extinguished entirely. Okay, so with the long-termists, they have the same exact view. Only they maintain our entire species. All of it has to be extinguished entirely. The Nazis thought there was some potential, in the Germans, you could kind of work with them and get Aryans out of them. And maybe your average sort of German who never became an Aryan, you can kind of keep them around as a house servant or something. Everyone else can be killed. So that's all the fruit of Darwinism, folks. Okay, and Darwinism is the fruit of science. Everyone says, oh, science will set you free. Please put 2 and 2 together. Okay, so science can be a wonderful thing, and I appreciate the sciences a great deal. But it also promotes a kind of scientistic worldview, atheistic naturalism. Okay, and atheistic naturalists are 100%, all of them are, with maybe I can make 2 exceptions to this, are Darwinians, and that leads to social Darwinism, eugenics, transhumanism, and the doctrine of the strong ought to dominate the weak. So science is going to set you free. It'll set our species free from existing at all. Okay. So here we go. Then the universal destination of goods. Oh, I'm sorry. There's the idea of the common good, that we should always act from justice so as to further the common good. Why? Because everything you have has been derived from the common good. That is, the society in which you were raised. It taught you how to speak. You can only add 2 + 2 and get the right answer 4 because you were taught to do that in virtue of the adults who instructed you. So you know how to speak. You can even only refer to yourself with the word I, with me, mine, right? With those pronouns, you can only use the correct pronouns because you were taught to do it. You guys follow me? If someone steals your car in the United States, at least, there's a possibility the police might actually find the person who stole it and return the car to you. If this is happening, if you're in like Kenya or something like that, the chances are slimmer that the police are going to do that, or just about 0. There was a guy, why did I mention Kenya? Because there was a guy who came here from Kenya, and someone stole his car, right? And the police returned his car. He was complete shock. He said, the police here actually do their job? You know? Okay, anyway. Nothing against Kenya. I'm sure it's very beautiful, and there's a lot of good people there, so on and so forth. So the common good embraces the universal destination of goods, and that is, you have to take into account the poor. This is distinctively Western. Like you go to Hindu society, if you see a poor person, you say, that person must have done something bad in his previous life, because now he's suffering. So as karma, you bad karma, now he has to pay it off by being poor. All right, tough luck. Not even tough luck, it's your fault. In the West, right, we get this tradition of visiting people in prison. Well, they're in prison, right? I mean, most people in prison deserve to be there. Obviously, there's some mistakes. But if the persons are in prison, you go to visit them. Widows and orphans, for much of human history, or the majority of it. Someone sees a widow, they see an opportunity for a concubine. They see an orphan, slave, right? So on and so forth. No, but in the Western tradition, you're to defend the widow. You're to place her under your protection. Defend or adopt the orphan, right? Visit people in prison. Tend to the sick, build hospitals. You guys follow me? Okay, so that's the tradition in the West. So that has been taken by it's been taken by everybody. It doesn't matter what position on the political spectrum you adopt. I think we've talked about that already, okay? Okay, so the idea of the sacred victim and all that, right? You can think about that now. And there's subsidiarity. That's the idea that you shouldn't, it would be unjust to take from cities, towns, families, and persons functions they can perform for themselves. Okay? So if we were to say, okay, all of you are now unemployed, and we're going to do everything with robots, and we're going to send you a universal basic income as a digital currency that's going to be deposited into your account once a month. And if you do any surfing online we don't like, or if you have done surfing online for years we don't like, we're not going to give you any money at all, put you in a re-education camp, or just get rid of you. That is a violation of subsidiarity. Now we can get rid of the dystopian last part there and just say that the principle of subsidiarity has been violated relative to everybody if we take away the dignity of work, because that is at the same time to take away the principle or violate the principle of participation. Everybody has a right to contribute to society, okay? There's an inherent dignity in work, all right? And it's how you earn self-respect, okay? And it would be a grave moral violation to take that from people. This is the perspective here. And through that work, you will contribute something to that society. Okay, if you're just, you're a custodian, just taking care of a building, keeping it clean. Well, guess what? You're keeping the vermin out of the building. If it weren't for the custodian or someone cleaning the place, eventually vermin would show up, insects, mice, things of that sort. It'd be difficult to live there or work there. So you're doing something that's valuable. All work has dignity, right? All positive work, like if one is at work selling cocaine or fentanyl to people and promoting addiction or trying to draw 18-year-old girls into hardcore pornography or something, that's bad work, right? But all positive work by its very nature has dignity, by definition. Then there's solidarity. Solidarity, that is the sense of belonging that we forge through working together in service of the common good, okay? There we go. That sense of belonging together, or sense of belonging in working together to further the common good. So I think we're basically out of time here, right? So Let's see here. Can't get through all of this stuff. All right, yes, this was done for PC. I kind of ran out of time here. I couldn't adapt this, this PowerPoint presentation for your purposes. All right, so you can look at these. You can screenshot these if you like. Okay, sort of out of time here again. So you actually have a text for McIntyre. If you go into your textbook, there's a chapter there on McIntyre. Okay, so I recommend you check that out. Let's see here. All right, folks, I think that's basically it. Yeah. All right, so let's call it quits. I want to thank you guys for a great semester. All right. And wish you the best. I'll be working through your material. Keep in touch. Send me an email. Tell me how you're doing. And you're welcome to take my intro philosophy course, my logic course. If you found value in this one, you get the whole package, the whole Shipyard approach to philosophy if you take the other two. I'll try to talk to the chair and see if we can drum up a section of philosophy of religion, which is worth doing. Very, very interesting set of questions we tackle there, people are concerned with. And I wish you guys the best. Keep in touch, and I look forward to reading your final projects.